more innovating, such as a platform, digital platform regulation work, and something that I really like, the care policies. This session has a very special meaning to me. The first one done in my work as the General Secretary of the ICSS, and I want to tell you that these spaces are fundamental, and I feel glad to participate in this. They allow us to know each other, to share experience, and work together to build concrete solutions and have a better welfare in our communities. We have the privilege to have two people that are extraordinarily panelists. We welcome Marcelina Bautista, founder and director of the National Center of the Professional Training and Leadership of Home Workers, and the author of book Imperceptibles. Rodrigo, your work is not only a homage for Marcelina, but for those that have worked for the rights of the home workers. ICSS has worked so that these people will be renowned and protected in the social security systems. We have promoted platforms and research, formation, and participation in places like in the Inter-American Commission for the Human Rights, where we reiterate our commitment to the rights of this sector. We know it's not easy, but the advancements we've done are the result of the effort and determination of women like Marcelina. Their work inspires us and reminds us of how important it is to boost the changes to build a fairer and equality society. Thank you for being here and to work together with us, Marcelina, Rodrigo, and all those that are in here. I really thank you for this seminar. It's one more step on the way to the welfare that we all deserve. Good morning, and please feel welcome, and thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, the General Secretary, for these words. And well, there is no more important or relevant moment to start this conversation dealing with work and at home in a context like Mexican context, where 10% of the population has the 50% of the income. The book, Imperceptibles, Vida y lucha of Marcelina Bautista, written by Rodrigo, has a very special space in the American conference because it's this kind of work is important. We have also Marcelina Bautista, who, is a social fighter, and she has worked to have the foundations for these kind of workers. So, first of all, I want to introduce Rodrigo, who wrote this book. Rodrigo Quintero studied a master's degree in international relationships at the University of Monterrey and a master's degree in human rights in the Ibero. He's a doctorate in the social and political studies at the UNAM. She's a consultant in human rights matters, and he works at the Pan American Institution of Statistics. Well, he has written La Ruta del Arcoíris en la Sustana, Sueños Transfronterizos, and Imperceptibles, who's the book that we're going to talk about. And now he is a teacher at the International Relationships at UNAM. So I'll give the floor to Rodrigo so that he'll give us a little bit more about this book, the way he has worked, and then we'll have Marcelina to give us her opinion on this process. Thank you very much, Jessica. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you, the General Secretary, for this opportunity. Well, I would start, first of all, dealing on how I reached Marcelina and the way she inspired me to create this novel, because actually it is a novel biography, because, it was like this because it came up like this. Jessica has already told us I had these previous books related to human rights and vulnerable groups. So then I have in my hands an article where they would talk about CASA, the organization, what Marcelina had done. And so I started writing an email to the organization and I sent it to them. So hoping to have an answer. And luckily I had a positive answer. So I had the first conversation thus with Marcelina. I don't know whether if it was Marcelina or anybody else, but I met Marcelina at a coffee shop, and I was talking to her the way the process had been with the other books that dealt with human rights topics, but they were different, from home workers. So then Marcia told me, well, let's start working. And one of the things that I told her about is that back then is that the book would have should have been a novel because generally all these topics are a very academic have a very academic approach. So the people that are interested in getting closer to this phenomenon, they're the people from the academia or linked to the government entities. So this topic goes beyond. So we are considering, we're talking about the home workers that are in many of Mexican and Latin American homes and in other places in the world. So we had to reach not only the workers, but also the owners of the houses where they would work. So that was a paramount thing. So this is why we decided that the topic would be dealt as a novel. So considering that back then it was 2018, 2.5 million home workers in Mexico with no rights at all, and with all the fact that has had been there for quite a long. So this is the way we started with the project. So we were following Marcelina for some years, like 2 years more or less, in all her activities, interviews with unionists and people that work in civil associations, government officials, so on and so forth. So the book starts with Marcelina as a little girl. The way Marcelina starts learning, ever since she was a kid, there are some oppression and violent systems that are there. They're not very visible sometimes for her, but in the long run, she would detect them. And actually, she's going to start developing the ability to see where there was gender discrimination or discrimination due to your ethnicity or your language. So that was the very first part of a book that would be dealing with her early years and the importance her mother and grandmother and father had, and even as a worker in the city they would live in, and then the relationships she's having with her colleagues, the lack of opportunities that there are in these places, and the migration that sometimes it's not a voluntary migration in many cases. So that very first part is important. Once we went to the second part, about the arrival of Marcelina to the city, I focused on talking about these relationships, which are pretty different and oppressive from the employer and the worker. In the case of home workers, where these employers did not were not aware and not were not sensible enough as to be able to relate that their actions are were harassing or violating human rights, and they were not being considered as such. So she goes, she starts reading all these kinds of matters that happen in different places where she works. So actually, I summarize, the characters because there are several employers. So to have this as an easier reading way. So I have these different employers that are invented, right? So in this kind of violence, such as shared violence with colleagues, she realizes that there are not only systemic violence, but also physical violence, cultural violence exercised in the homes where they work. So, in that stage, it is related to a preacher that participates in the liberation theology that is teaching her from an organization where Marcelina gets involved, which is a organization that would defend workers' rights, and then the tools and mechanisms to realize the way the world works, and the way these inequities are, and how to try to think or rethink different worlds. So it seems to me pretty interesting that this is where you actually have the very first seed of growth regarding human rights, where you really, she's really aware that definitely there is something missing, something is being done wrong, the society is doing something wrong. So then comes so here we have the very important role of the academia and some human rights activists, feminists, women, that are going to be contributing with their knowledge of series of concepts that Marcelina is going to get actually to incorporate them into these very first utopia, of thinking of Mexico, a different one, and it's going to be incorporating them. And she's going to boost the integration of the very first groups of workers of homes, and actually they're going to have these talks first, very informal talks where they were sharing experiences and life experiences, pain, so on and so forth. But to see what they could do, actually there was not only a simple attitude of, let's have a contention work, but let's think of what we could do in order to transform this reality. So from there on, curiously enough, I've always said that this happens in the 80s. It's a very interesting decade for Latin America, and most of it for most of the people that are watching us, because it's related to the transitions to democracy. And the transitions to democracy in Latin America are important because there is a change in many of the states, constitutional change, where they start actually opening to different sectors that have been marginated, political participation, or actually, the recognition of certain rights. It's not for free that actually in this stage we are going to develop a very first organization at Latin American level, which is going to be the CONATRAC, the Colatra. And that organization is going to group different home workers in Latin America, having cells in each and every one of our countries and sharing their experiences and looking at the capabilities that they would have to go forward in this agenda. That was a great opportunity actually to go forward in a democratizing agenda. This is back in 1988 for us to have an idea. So from there on, Marce and all the colleagues start actually to have a greater capability to integrate, not only to sue people and also to together have a response. And this is pretty interesting because we're going to see a phenomenon that happens very rarely. An alliance, a regional alliance that is going to make the agenda go forward very much faster than in the actual countries. This was being done individually. So that seems to me to be something which has to be uh, underlined in the framework of these kind of spaces like the Inter-American Conference. Then later on, we get to the second part where I've always said that that's a paradigm, because actually the agenda is based upon the protection of work rights, and democratization got in a moment of liberalism with this neoliberal politics or policies. As you well know, many of the work rights were crashed. Their regularization of a series of productive activities was something that really mocked the decade of the 90s, not only in Mexico, but in the whole region. So you had these two sides, the recognition of the good work and the fundamental rights recognition, and on the other hand, the new political economic policy in the world and in the region. So, home workers had a paradigm. They came from a capitalism that never acknowledged the right of fair work. And then, on the other hand, we had a stage where what you were actually not really looking for was to protect the workers. So this is the stage that Marce has to deal with, together with other fighters in Latin America. And so, despite all this, they go forward with the agenda. And this is going to be paramount because actually, this organization, regional organization, the very first thing that they're going to talk about is one of the ways that they could be able to boost actually using the tools, liberal instruments, which are the international organizations from the UN mainly. You know, what a better thing to do it to deal with it with the ILO. So from there on, with the ILO, they stopped having. Marcia will give you a better detail. This approach with some international European organizations, if I'm not wrong, and then she goes to the ILO where the fight is not going to be easy at all. There's going to be a whole process of dialogue, and as you know, the organization is made up of three parts. So they did not only have to deal with this matter with the state or the part of the employers, but also many times the unions were captured by some governments. They were more like in favor of the employer, depending on the situation of the countries. So workers who had not been recognized as part of these union groups. So there are some union groups that go against the rights they were trying to defend and obtain. So this part of the novel is pretty rich because actually it deals with this stage where they find themselves in the ILO, and there are different responses. On one side, we have this advocating and this to see how negotiations are made, the cultural response, which is one of the ones that I enjoyed the most because they told me that workers had a great, let's say, blanket led there in Switzerland, and it went to the media. So the way they used the communication media with as instruments, and they had this correlation of rights with this daily activities that have to be performed at homes. So this part to me is one of the ones that I enjoyed the most. So later on, we have the approval of Covenant 189 in year 2011. So in 2000, Marcia had already founded CASE. And this is important to say because actually this is where that's a great project, the great project of her and the workers of, all the workers that were with her for a long time. Because indeed, it's pretty hard to have an AC forward or CA forward. It's difficult to have support when there is not legal support. And actually, there are some practices that are against equity in the context or framework you are in. So, the formation of the AC was pretty important to all workers. And this is where they started working, not only continuously educating that they already have up to now. And actually, the the integration of leaderships. This is important, the formation of leaderships that for workers that are the main support for the creation of cells all along their country today, because to me that seems to be indispensable. So Marce and the workers go back with Covenant 189. So, as you may know, the process is always the signature and then the ratification. And in the case of nations, and the signature or the signing of this in many countries is pretty simple. In Mexico, we've always had a very lazy pen, so we always sign treaties. But the good part is the ratification, because there is where we have the most complicated process. And I don't know if it's the most complicated, because all of them are, because it's one of the hard, but it's one of the hardest process, to start convincing authorities to ratify Covenant 189. So and this stage is incredible too, because actually it talks to us about imagination, the creative capabilities that people have in order to develop the actions that would have an impact in getting the objectives that we had in mind at first. So there we have, and this is why we have this book cover, you know, because we think of a campaign that is strong enough to reach all the sectors, but obviously the state, which is where we were focusing the most, and get them to be convinced that if they are already committed to the singing, maybe you could also ratify it. So it lasted a long time. And here there is a very interesting part, because in this process we start having alliances not only with civil association parties, but also government commissions, like commissions of the human rights, the National Commission of Human Rights in Mexico, so on and so forth. So the commissions of human rights were paramount and a cornerstone. So they started playing with elements and jurisdictional processes and non-jurisdictional processes, the academia. They start having these groups of employers, conscious or aware employers, that are going to try to include in the way it would be possible with this in mind. So that would be the third stage or the third part. And then finally, there we have the last one, which is developed with the sentence 9218 with from the Supreme Court of Justice, which is pretty important to our country, that talks about a pilot program to subscribe workers. And the novel closes in this great moment where Marcia gives a speech at the Instituto Mexicano de Seguro Social, actually acknowledging all these fight process, which was pretty interesting. And then some of points that I would like to talk about as were like the earthquakes that I have in the novel. They are conscious earthquakes. We could talk about this later on, but it seems to be pretty interesting, the actual response and the organization there was in 2018, which was something that we have to deal with and consider. Um, so that would be it on my part. That would be a brief summary of what the novel is. So I give the floor to Marcia. Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Indeed, it's pretty interesting the way you tell us about the process of writing the book, but there's nothing else like listening to the voice of the star of the book, and then this session of many stories of right and fights, and Marcelina Bautista. I will read her background very quickly. She is the founder and director of the National Center for Professional Training and Leadership of Work Employees, created 20 years ago. She has founded several organizations and instruments for rights of people working in homes. the International Federation of Home Workers, founded in 2013, and the first union in the sector in Mexico in 2015, and the process of the passing of the covenant in the ILO. She had the first cooperative for the development of home workers. She was awarded with the international right defense in, and she has named one of the 100 leaders in Mexico. She was awarded by CONAPRED in 2013, and she was awarded by the BBC of London, one of the most inspiring women and inclusive in the world. We know with no longer delays, I'll give you the floor. Um, well, first of all, I want to thank deeply Professor Jose Pedro Kumamoto, General Secretary of the ICSS. They always greet me at this home. So and also the members of the ICSS. Rodrigo, thank you very much. When I listen to it, and then I read the book again, because that's a fight. It's been a very tiring and beautiful fight. I have enjoyed a lot the way this work has been relevant to Mexico and to my colleagues as home workers. And this book, as Rodrigo states, which is in a law novel format, talks about my early years and the way I get to Mexico to become a home worker and living the way I used to live 10 years ago. So, because, the situation has changed, the way they treat you, the way they give you work at the homes. So, nevertheless, in the era where when I arrived here, it used to be a very unknown job by many, and even our employers that would look like the workers are were like their ownership. So this is why they would treat them the way they would. You do what I tell because this is why I pay to you. So it was like a very difficult part, because I would also see my colleagues from this squad, that this way of oppression, discrimination, and exploitation. It was a work with a lot of machismo, right? With those from of us that do this kind of work, that are used to living under this kind of context in the home work in the city and homes where we work in. So these kind of things out there by women employers that hire us. Nevertheless, having a relationship with other women is, we have a greater discrimination, because we have not seen this work in solidarity. So this is when I became an activist and a human rights defender of home workers. So I always, thought of how to write this story. I had to leave something written, and I was not going to be able to write and fight at the same time, even though I had some writings, or, even my speeches that they were like in the drawer. So that comes Rodrigo and convinces me, because I talk about the fight, the way I'm going to talk about it, because it's not only beautiful fight, but there are the many things that sometimes were like something that would not allow us to go forward. Now we've been here for 25 years. In September will be 25 years fighting, so it has been pretty difficult. And this is why we have for so many years. And I always dreamt of not having to fight for the rights of the workers would be respected. Nevertheless, we've always had this process that Rodrigo has told us about, in a framework of an organization, regional, international organization. When we have Colatrao in 1988, then in Mexico, it was a country without anything. It was a country that I was pretty afraid to go to this encounter in Colombia to see what I was going to see. But it was all the whole contrary thing because I came back with very inspired by many people, many women home workers in a very strong fight in Colombia and in Brazil and in Chile, Argentina, and this countries like Mexico, Guatemala, some from Central America. We were way behind as for organizations and collectives defending our rights. So I started learning, and for more than 30 years, I was within the collateral and having a very important space that allowed me to facilitate the process. There we go to the international arena after we heard the movements of union movements to say that we were not able to organize ourselves because we were scattered at homes and we were not able collectively work. And then one day we showed it was not that. There was also some lawyers that would say that we were not be able to have a virgin collective virgin because all that dispersion would it was only a collective matter, they would think. So in other countries, people would be able to sign contracts and get other rights, but something we found in all Latin American countries, and after that, when we were aware of the international arena, the rights of the human rights of home workers have been always put aside. So it's not like the other kinds of jobs, but it's also a very discriminated job because it has only been mentioned very weakly, that law that did not allow us to have the very same rights as such an any other worker. So social security was missing, the part of the work contract. And so when we have the Covenant 189 by ILO with us and there in the content of home workers, so we would be able to work about our experience, so that the treaty or agreement would be able to have this kind of framework of the need of our rights. So then we have a Covenant 189, and then it happened to be like nothing really happened. So we started making noise at TV. So there comes as a whole knowledge of Agreement 189. So we started to have allies that are pretty strong, very important allies, from the media, cameras, and we also had to educate. And I think it is important to talk about the work we did, not only educating home workers and employers that are still to learn a lot, but most of it legislators that would think as employers and not legislators, women legislators that would be feminists, but they didn't think of how to be able to get equality in these sectors as workers. And then that led us to be stronger and tell you what you have to do, what we are expected to do, and to tell them that their work has to be coherent according to their discourse. So we ratify Agreement 189. But before anything, everything that is Rodrigo telling us, all that time that we took to try to convince, and we were not able to, Social Security was something pretty impossible where many people would say no on my corpse. They're not going to have any right. They're going to have a family right. No, otherwise, you can ask my worker. She has been doing well. That was not something we wanted. We had this mandatory Social Security a benefit, and with all the benefits, including a home. So this is where we had all these federal work law with their modification, but we were not able to do so because it was pretty difficult to think of the way that we would work 8 hours while our employers would only be working many hours. Nevertheless, we demanded our rights as is set up by the law, and somebody had to comply with it. So there also comes a agreement for social security that for us in our struggle we were able to do it, a right to social security in a voluntary way that lasted a long time. And the experience tells us that more than 20 years, only 3,000 workers were affiliated with that system. So, with all this struggle, a home worker which is older than 60 is taken away from a house of two single women that were with her. So she is sent out and she has a compensation, and they say, well, no, because you do not have any kind of contract. And then she goes to conciliation, and it was like that. You do not have any contracts. How can you actually demonstrate that you're telling me the truth? So their lawyer decides to go to court, and they also tell them there is no evidence because there was no contract, neither social security or a work that 50 or 60 years was not going to be worried about signing a contract or having evidence that she was working at a certain place for several years. So when we realized that this resolution was the same one everywhere, then we went to the court with other instances where we talked about this situation was not going to last for a long time, and it was going to happen for the whole workers because nobody had a mandatory social security, neither a contract. And this is why the court studies this situation, and then we have the resolution that it was unconstitutional, the fact that the social security workers would have a voluntary social security plan, and also that the federal law of labor would not consider the rights such as a contract. And so this is why IMSS is ordered to have a pilot plan, and a pilot plan that lasted for 3 years, while the law of Social Security will make 2023. Then we were able to have this law to the right of Social Security to the home workers as mandatory. And so both IMSS with their new director and a new administration, and they were able to have this agreement, Social Security Covenant 189, and the federal labor law has us in a floor which is equitative. But there is still a very important sector, which is people, employers, that after 6 years that we've been with this very same fight, only 1,600 workers compared to the 2.5 million workers. So it's a very big universe for such a kind of workers. So if we say we've been here for quite a long time, and the government has done its part, so we still need to talk to the employer so that we can materialize the rights of home workers. And in the book, so that you will read it, we also worked a lot. We had colleagues, groups with colleagues, so that it would be an inspiring book for those that would like to fight and do not leave the fight because their rights were not complied. And not leaving the fight because there is somebody that doesn't want to do anything, but also try to make people understand that what we want is a human right, and what we want is no more than just what is established in our laws, national and international ones. So, to me, it's paramount to say how this work could not be done by one single person, but by a series of people. And I want to acknowledge the work performed by my colleagues from the CASI group and the home allies and the employers also, because they also convinced themselves that this fight would commit them also, government and many people, that in the end they realized that it was like that, because otherwise they're going to be behind. So they started fighting with us, and they are very few, senator, deputies, so on and so forth, and people that takes force when there we have the previous administration and they ratify this laws. But we also have the Roma movie, and we have Cuaron in our lives, in our fight, and it includes a lot to talk about the way a Mexican society continues living, having a sector in isolation and margination. So they work a lot with us to talk about this kind of situation and being able to, that from memes or the quotes, then it would be more coherent with all these advancements that we had to hand in. And we continue with the fight, because the fight is not only to be able to have the laws. In this case, we still need to materialize it. We still need the home workers to be aware of the rights. Home workers, the very first or the main obstacle that they have to deal with is fear, being afraid to demand their rights in order to keep our job. But there is something that we have to do in order to get more. So each and every one of us may decide, but the fight is still on, so that the employers would sum up and commit to the rights of the home workers, because this culture has to change. A culture where we were taught that it's part of our family, thought that they told us to be able to say thank you when we have kind of like a job, and the effort each and every one can be. So we had said that we look lost to be complied, and workers still organize and train themselves, because we have a very big challenge. If we do not professionalize our job, because we cannot still be a victim. We cannot go and say we need to work and somebody's going to give that work to us. But we have to become professionals in order to have a most better qualified and better paid work. So I'm a little bit worried about time. No, it's you're about time, and we still have 10 minutes. So I believe it is paramount, this kind of advancement that we had. And what I ask from employers and from all the society is that we have to see the homework as the way we see many changes in our country and many other countries, that nothing has to make it so difficult to sign a contract. It should be difficult to subscribe workers to the social security, whether we have one or not. If they cannot grant all these rights, they cannot be candidates to have a worker, to discriminate, to not to give all these rights that we have conquered, and women would not be solidary. And when we have a president, a woman, it has to be the reflection that we all have to go forward together. We, if you know, if there is somebody at a certain level, you cannot let others behind at a level that nobody would see them or nobody would respect their rights. And this is why we have to fight, all of us, so that the work at home should be this end job that the ILO every day struggles so that in home works may be seen and paid as the law demands. And in order to finish, follow us in social media in order to know the tools that we are putting in place so that you may use them and you may have some ways to make your rights to be respected and comply with those rights, and to work together to go forward in the dignity of home work. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Thank you very much, Marcelina. Indeed, it's pretty inspiring to listen to you, to be able to know your story from your voice and from what Rodrigo has told us, to be able to generate consciousness for these kind of people that we work with. So that's a responsibility. So this talk is paramount for the conference to promote human or labor rights and to promote social security for this particular group. But of course, all those groups that have been vulnerable, and in order to get to the thought of people. And I was glad to see that this was a model, and the way you see how this novel would contribute to the fight. I know that through the story of Marcelina, but this deals a little bit more or talks to the conscious or awareness of the people. So how would you say that it was received by the people? Well, once again, thank you for this space. Well, it varies. We've had a very good reception on the part of a people that have worked with Marcelina a long time. The truth of the matter is that we have to thank for each and every one of the spaces that we've been granted, because indeed the book was published by the Iberoamericana University, and their applications have not so many repercussions. Let's say that luckily, both the Ibero-American University and other instances, one, for example, UNAM, have opened the spaces that are important to us. Academic spaces have been important. The spaces for social, the civil organization has been also important. And I believe that before going to that, I would like to say that finally it's a novel. A novel is a dialogue between the novel and the reader. It's a dialogue that you have, that you ask yourself questions. It's not with Marcelina or myself, it's your own consciousness, with your own experience and your memories. I think this novel, to many people, would have this kind of relationship that you have had, and maybe you have not realized that a worker has worked with us, and we sometimes we don't even know their names, so on and so forth. So in the end, you have a dialogue with people, and unhappily, there are people that they don't take it for good. I had a very regrettable experience, but happily there still are some interested organizations to give voice to this, and they still buy the book. So it's part of the changes that we've going through, and that Marcelina, Kaze, and the workers fight for, the cultural changes, and they come through these cultural tools. Well, with the same idea, Marcelina, How was it to you, choosing parts, which parts of the novel or the story would be into the novel, the way they were building, which were fictitious and which personages were real. So, how was this process and the election of moments? Well, there were very many things for next novel. We had to see what could be relevant to people and homework so that they would read it, who was going to be able to start a fight and see all the efforts. It's not easy. There is, like Rodrigo says, there is a novel that when we were writing it, when I was in the Christian labor association, youth, the preacher would prepare youngsters so that they would talk about their own reality and build build a space from there for dialogue, that they would also be able to demand their rights without being harmed. So, in this part, when Rodrigo says, Father, Father Joe, well, when I was talking to Father Ivan, then I'm not going to give his name. I would say, I was going to give your name, but now I'm going to give his name because a year ago, a year and a half ago, he passed away. So he left me a experience that is like the basement for you not to fall down. So there are many things. The book, you need to read the book. And those that were in the fight with me, for example, the speech that to me later on I read it. I was really inspired when I talked, when we introduced the pilot plan, and this when Alfonso Cuarón talks to me to say, well, Marcelina, I want to give you the movie so that you may fight with your co-workers. So those were inspiring experiences that allowed me to go on, because I believe I always, when I say it has been a beautiful fight, I would say that I always found allies and people that in some way contributed so that today the rights of our group, I always struggle for all those people. You have to be strong enough so that we may be able to demand our rights at work. So from there, you can see a movie which is called Dia de Descanso, which is also pretty inspiring, because me, that I have been like the star or the protagonist of this fight, when you're there, you do not see, from the other points of view. So when I watch this movie, I see it like that inspiration that we all had, we all contributed, and we fought for what we want. So watch the movie Dia de Descanso, or Day Off, which is in YouTube from CASE. And many colleagues like Christy left the fight, and many people that inspire me to say, well, Marce, if we had had these, when I suffer from these and that, they were like motifs in order to go on and finding, which is something which is paramount in this our fight as home workers, always having the initiative and having new things that would allow the group to still be there. So please read the book. Thank you very much. That is going to be our homework. We're going to watch it at home. Rodrigo, you talked about the consciousness or awareness earthquakes. Well, yeah. Well, obviously, the novel is divided into three earthquakes. Marcia told me that some time in her life in Nochistlán would have a lot of earthquakes. So you start with the first earthquake with the awareness that she's getting. You know, the world moves, and she decides not only to work but also to start working. So she breaks a pattern from the community. So that would be the first earthquake. The second one is the earthquake in '85. And Marcy suffered from that in the state of Mexico, but it has an effect. And there I have the case of this textile factory that many workers lose their life. And this is where we talk about rights. And the third one, which was obviously the one that we had the closest to us in the 2017, because many of the people that passed away were home workers in the condominiums, apartment buildings. So there were very chaotic moments, as for what Marcia told me, because the employers did not have the identification of people. They did not know who their family members were. They did not know their addresses. So it was a great work, to organize. They had these calls. My mother was working there, my uncle, my auntie, she was working in such an ex department. So it's something that I put forward on the table. So when we have a catastrophe like that, not being able to have a support system and not being able to have this work all regularized, it may cause lots of problems. We've had all these problems in the 2017. It was also important. So the tragedy is around the corner, so it's better to be conscious and be cautious. So I thought I had to talk about this in the novel. Marcelina, you told us that the main obstacle that you see is fear that there is in the home workers in these social fights in order to obtain and have their rights be respected, and being able to have a minimum social security flow. What would you tell those workers? How would you invite them? How would you think organizations, ally organizations, would be able to work in order to support, to reduce that fear, and being able to build the pathway to promote the rights of workers? And without them, our homes would not work at all. Without the homework and the care that we have in our homes would not really work out. So what would your suggestion be for the authorities, so that now they are in this interview, there are many people from many regions, so that we would not be so afraid, and we would be able to work in this sense? Well, first of all, workers that are listening to me may say, well, I have a need of a job. So they change or they exchange their rights for a badly paid war job, for the lack of rights. Well, and for that implies, but as I previously said, we have to lose something in order to win, and in order to win that, it's not like the obligation of homework to be behind their employers so that they would be given a contract or social security, because we already have the law. So what we're lacking of in all the countries is that the states governments would believe or create that public policy so that they would allow you to force the employers. If there is not an inspection that home workers would have different ways to do this job. I've worked with the people that have suffered with discrimination and violence in their working place, and because in there's no law. So this is why many workers suffer from violence, and when there is violence within homes, also the worker suffers from that violence. So I think that if governments have ratified, because I also want to say that in the region with the most 189 agreements that have been ratified is in Latin America, and with 189 covenant or agreement, many of the countries modified their laws, like Mexico. Mexico is a very huge platform, but we also needed, the effective implementation and the fulfillment of the employers to comply with the rights and obligations that they have to deal with. So that we've always said that. Um, Along with all the effort that we've had in Mexico and Latin America, and the collateral and feed and so on and so forth, collateral Grupo Madre, more than 16 countries, feed, which is at an international level. Within the work they do is to make the movement to go forward so that we would be able to modify the law. But also, home workers have struggled a lot, and we've been able to get very few because the participation of the states is pretty rare. It's pretty hard that today we would have, like in Mexico, all employers be aware that all these laws are there, that there may be a sanction for not complying. So there is an inspection in the homes, and so that the home workers would professionalize their job, so that they would get the money that they want to make. Because many times employers have some complaints and they demand from something that the workers do not have. Workers have never had any kind of school in order to master this work. Their experience has led them to do their best, and they have found a way to do this professionally, but also we consider that we still need this professionalization so that this work would be well qualified from the home workers, and then we're not going to be going forward. We're not going to be spending a lot of money and effort if you're not going to have our governments to lead us. If our governments do not go back to those laws that would legislate that covenant to this regulation framework, you cannot stop there. We cannot stop there. We have to go forward. So the call of attention is for all the members of the CISS, so that the home workers would have a right of a mandatory social security right. See, it's a different way. The worker is charged a lot for. Now in Chile, I see that we have an inequity in the implementation of the rights of work as home workers. So I believe that we have to use this voice in order to say that we're not going to go forward to a society where you would have a decent job, like many of us said, and inequality of conditions, when we're not like making effective all this regulation framework, regulatory framework. So I hope we will be able to go forward also together with our governments. Yeah, thank you very much. It is paramount for us to keep on working together with the different organizations, that are part of a conference. And Colatral is one of the members that we feel very proud of, that they are part of this great team, that we would be able to establish networks and alliances to promote labor rights and a minimum floor for this home workers. And before finishing with the session, I would like to give a minute to each and every one of us to give to give us the last message. Marcelina has already summoned counters, but you also have a final comment before finishing our session. We'll start with Rodrigo and then Marcelina. Well, I will invite you to take a look at the text, but also to all those people that are struggling for a labor works. I think this is a very important book because it inspires. I think literature, one of the marvelous things is that inspires us, inspires mainly in this case all the people that work, because in many cases that problem is a big one, precarious works. We're talking about different struggles that still happen in Latin America and in Mexico. We talk about people that work in the trash recollection, those deliverers also, with the law that they have just passed, sexual workers, many people, the actual government workers with these they cut these rights. So it's a book that really inspires, because you see the struggle of workers when people say, well, that's not possible, and they give up. And now that's the way it is. So that's the way they're going to treat me. You have to get used to it because that's the way it is. So they had a harder moment and they made it. So it's great inspiration for Mexico and Latin America. And just to remind you that in Latin America, we have a lot of instruments of fight, regional systems within the Inter-American Commission on the Inter-American Court. Differently from many countries, we may use these mechanisms to get to where we want. And where can we find your book? It's in the Ibero, but I would recommend you to ask from Marcelina, because she can distribute it, so they would have more direct contact. So, Marcelina, thank you very much. Of course, the summoning is for home workers. Now, we're very proud to say that we're going to get 25 years in a fight in 2025. So, and home workers shall continue working. They must continue defending their rights. But if we are not united, and as the struggle tells us and the experience has told us, that we cannot do it alone. All of us, we will be able, and the examples that we defy a country of discrimination, a classist society, in order to have all the rights to these workers. So it's important to work together, and not only the home workers, but also instances that have to have in their agenda this topic of home workers, and to really have all the potential and to be able to materialize all of our advancements. And I would also recommend you to read the book. The book is not only going to it's fight from home workers, but it's pretty hard. When I was 14 years old and I started working, I never thought that half a million home workers would be able to have a social security, and in order to have a decent job. No, what I tell them is that they're not going to have this kind of job if they do not fight for their rights, and if they do not do anything in order to get that right that will allow them to have a life of quality and descent. Thank you very much, Marcelina and Rodrigo. And one more announcement. Both Marcelina and Rodrigo are co-authors of one of the chapters of the volume 6 of the book of the 80th anniversary of ICSS. And the title is For Those People That look for the rights of home workers and the paradigm in Mexico. So this is a way to get closer to the topic and keep working on protecting the rights of these people and the human rights. Thank you very much, and we'll see each other next time.